Hello, I'm Africa 54 Managing Editor Vincent McCory in for hashtag the U-Word. It's Monday, August the 30th. This is Africa 54.
Exhausted migrants land on a Spanish beach. Thousands gather in Washington to show their support for voting rights. And aid agencies struggle with harsh new realities in Afghanistan.
We'll have those stories in a moment, but first, Kenya is stepping up its COVID vaccination campaign by setting up inoculation centers in public spaces like malls, markets, and bus stops. Authorities are hoping the extra convenience will lift a vaccination rate that stands at just 2%. Victoria Munga reports from Nairobi.
At a bus terminal in Nairobi, Kenya, hundreds of people wait to get vaccinated. It's an exercise that has saved them long-distance travel to the designated vaccination centers. Walter Juma, a public bus conductor, is getting ready to receive his first COVID-19 jab. He says because of the demanding nature of his job, he could not find the time to go for vaccination at the health facilities.
The vaccination is now near my place of work and home. This has helped a lot. There are other people who cannot walk for long, the elderly, and some are sick.
Health officials say the number of people turning up for their vaccinations has doubled since more inoculation sites opened a month ago.
We've decided to come to the community because usually we give Monday to Friday in our public health facilities. But you find most people don't have time to come Monday to Friday. So we decided to come to the community so that we increase accessibility to the vaccine.
Kenya is receiving more vaccine doses from the U.S. government. In other nations, so the supply is much better than during the first phase of the vaccination program. With its new vaccination strategy, Kenyan authorities are hoping to vaccinate at least 10 million people by the end of the year.
We are now using about 800 centers, and we are going to gradually increase this to 3,000 centers by December. Increasing them means you are reaching people. You are opening vaccination center closer to where people are.
So far, 2.5 million people have received the first dose of the vaccine in Kenya. Victoria Amunga for VOA News, Nairobi.
A boat carrying around 55 migrants landed in the middle of the night Sunday on a beach in Spain's Canary Islands. The migrants, most of them from sub-Saharan Africa, were visibly exhausted and needed the assistance of health workers. Passers-by also helped in the operation, offering blankets and water bottles. The boat in which they were traveling was seen aground just a few meters off the Castillo del Romero beach in the southeast of Gran Canary Island. This year, more than 8,300 migrants have made the dangerous crossing from the West African coast to the Canaries archipelago. Now, internet services in South Sudan were disrupted Monday, and security forces were deployed on the streets, which were quieter than usual. Residents sheltered inside after activists called for protests against President Salva Kiir's government. With Kiir scheduled to address lawmakers at Parliament's opening session on Monday morning, a coalition of activist groups reiterated their call on Sunday for public rallies demanding that he resigns. However, there was no sign early on Monday of major street gatherings in the capital, Juba. Some activists told Reuters they were in hiding for security reasons. Now, suspected Islamist militants killed at least 19 people in a raid on a village in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. That's according to local authorities. The attackers looted houses and started fires near Virunga National Park in North Kivu province overnight between Friday and Saturday. There was no immediate claim of responsibility. The government declared martial law in North Kivu and neighboring Ituri province at the beginning of May in an attempt to quell a surge in violence that the military largely attributes to the Allied Democratic Forces insurgency. But the number of civilians killed in such attacks has only increased since then, according to the Kivu Security Tracker, which maps unrest in eastern Congo. Now, at least 30 soldiers were killed and 60 wounded on Sunday in Houthi strikes on a military base belonging to forces of the Saudi-led coalition in southwest Yemen, according to a spokesman for the Southern Forces and medical sources. The spokesman says that between 30 to 40 soldiers were killed and at least 60 wounded, adding the death toll may still rise as rescuers were still clearing the scene. The Southern Forces are part of the Saudi-led coalition. The attacks came at a time when peace talks between the Saudi-led coalition and the Houthis, and backed by the United Nations and the United States, have stalled after both sides failed to reach a compromise deal. In the Netherlands, lawyers from an international law firm representing more than 200 victims have filed a petition calling on the International Criminal Court to investigate the 6-year Saudi-led coalition war in Yemen. The lawyers from Guernica 37 International Justice Chambers of London says they have submitted evidence compiled by survivors, their relatives and families of the deceased who were killed during the war. Toby Cadman, the lead attorney, spoke to VOA's Peter Clote about the prospects of holding accountable those responsible for committing human rights violations and crimes against humanity during the war in Yemen.
We certainly recognise that it is not a straightforward case. These are very complex matters that the prosecutor at the International Criminal Court is going to have to grapple with. We, of course, also want to make sure that those who are responsible, those who are ultimately responsible for the conduct of the coalition, are held responsible. But we also have to be realistic in what we can expect the International Criminal Court to do by way of its jurisdiction. There are, of course, jurisdictional limitations. What I would say is that this is the first step in a number of legal actions that will be taken. We are already working on a second submission that will be submitted to the International Criminal Court in due course, which looks at the role of the various different members of the coalition acting under the guidance of the Saudi and Emiratis. And we are also looking at the role of the United Kingdom, the role of the United States in providing technical support and guidance to the coalition, as well as providing arms and training mercenaries. In terms of what we expect, of course, we expect the prosecutor to open an investigation. We do not expect that to happen overnight. It's going to be a matter that takes time. The prosecutor is going to have to review the legal and factual basis, as well as looking at the evidential basis. So this is the start of a long road, but when we look at the conflict in Yemen, the number of civilians that have died, that almost 5 million children are entering a famine this year alone, we believe that this is the responsibility of the International Criminal Court and the international community generally to not simply wash away these complaints and to take it very seriously.
That was VOA's Peter Clote speaking to Toby Cadman, attorney for Guernica 37 International Justice Chambers of London. Thousands of Americans gathered Saturday in Washington to demand federal legislation to protect voting rights. Shakib Islam reports from the protest March On for Voting Rights, which also marked the 58th anniversary of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s historic I Have a Dream speech on the National Mall.
The movement is the same as it was 58 years ago with the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., and so is the message.
It's important because Dr. King was here, and Dr. King secured the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This is a continuation of that effort. We are here to protect what Dr. King secured.
We came to strategize, organize, and mobilize.
This year's March on Washington is aimed at reversing changes to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, made by the U.S. Supreme Court in a 2013 decision.
It's a racist system. It's a system that wasn't built for fairness or equality. So our votes matter.
With gerrymandering and voter suppression and the different things that a certain party is doing to keep people from being able to vote easily, they're stripping American citizens from a basic right.
Stand up, vote! Stand up, vote! Stand
This year, several Republican-controlled state legislators have passed bills that tighten the rules around casting ballots and running elections. Supporters of the new laws say they are necessary to prevent election fraud, and that the John R. Lewis Advancement Act of 2021, which would restore elements of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and recently passed the U.S. House, is unnecessary.
So there's no threat to the voting rights law. It's against the law to discriminate in voting on the basis of race already, and so I think it's unnecessary.
We haven't had fraud in this country in elections since probably the turn of the previous century. The last election, there was almost zero voter fraud. This is just an excuse to take away our right to vote.
Protesters here were pushing for several new laws that they say will help protect voters' access to ballots.
If it were possible to eliminate gerrymandering, to make it easier for people to register to vote, to make it easier for people who don't have identification to get an ID card.
Along with voting rights, many here were also demanding that elected officials push for Washington, D.C. statehood. 140 organizations organized this march, during which members of Congress, along with Martin Luther King III, vowed to protect democracy, make D.C. a state, and ensure fair and easy access to the ballot box. Saqib Islam, VOA News, Washington.
We are excited to hear what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We are also streaming or broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also, check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, keeping us at U.S. airports safe 20 years after 9/11. Stay with us.
Join us for the next Straight Talk Africa. We'll explore the politics of mental health. What do our cultural attitudes towards it say about the societies we live in? We'll bring you the stories of refugees in Uganda who are speaking out about their mental health, and we'll have expert analysis on why African governments need a long-term agenda for mental health care. Join me, Haiti Adams, on the next Straight Talk Africa.
Well, it's now a tropical storm, but Hurricane Ida made landfall in the United States Gulf Coast state of Louisiana Sunday as a Category 4 storm with 240 km/h winds on the Saffir-Simpson scale of hurricane intensity. The storm's arrival comes 16 years after Hurricane Katrina's onslaught. As a Russia Rabasani reports, memories of Katrina still loom large.
This was the view from inside the hurricane hunting plane Miss Piggy, panning the eye of Hurricane Ida. That video and this satellite imagery come from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, showing Ida bearing down on Louisiana. Area business owners boarded up windows ahead of Sunday's landfall. At a virtual briefing with federal emergency personnel on Saturday, U.S. President Joe Biden warned those in the region to stay alert throughout the storm.
I'm urging the people of the area to pay attention and be prepared. I want to say it again, pay attention and be prepared. Have supplies for your household on hand. Follow the guidance from local authorities. And if you have to move to shelter, make sure you wear a mask and try to keep some distance, because we're still facing a highly contagious Delta variant as well.
Louisiana currently has less than 41% of its population vaccinated against the coronavirus, according to usafacts.org. Still, some residents aren't even considering an evacuation.
We're going to stay because, just in case if it's a bad hurricane, people going to want loot. So we got to keep our eye on the store.
Other residents have no plan to tempt fate.
We decided to take off, because just like with Hurricane Katrina, we're not trying to be here for the disaster. So we ain't taking no chances, we leaving.
Ida's landfall in the United States comes exactly 16 years after Hurricane Katrina ravaged the Gulf Coast. More than home to millions of Americans, the area is an industrial hub with 3 ports and a nuclear power plant. Speaking Sunday on CBS's Face the Nation, Louisiana Governor John Bel Edwards said lots of people listened to expert advice.
It appears that hundreds of thousands of people took the opportunity yesterday to leave, especially in those low-lying areas in southeast Louisiana along the coast, those that are not protected by our much-enhanced hurricane and storm risk reduction system. We asked people to make sure that when they went to bed last night, they were prepared to ride out the storm and that they would go to bed where they intended to ride out the storm.
The governor says the most populated areas should be protected from storm surges following a $14 billion investment in the years since Katrina. Hurricane Ida smashed into Cuba Saturday on its way to the United States, flooding roads and agricultural areas in its path. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News.
As the U.S. evacuation effort and military withdrawal come to a close in Afghanistan this week, President Joe Biden's decisions are facing intense scrutiny. Michelle Quinn reports on the criticism and the attack that left U.S. military personnel and Afghan civilians dead in Kabul.
The final hours of evacuation from Afghanistan. Even after the August 31 deadline, the Biden administration says it will continue to work to bring U.S. citizens and Afghan allies out of the country. A senior Taliban official said people will be allowed to travel abroad in the future. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the international community will be watching.
114 countries have made very clear that it is their expectation that the Taliban will permit freedom of travel going past August 31st.
On Sunday, President Joe Biden honored the 13 U.S. military personnel who died in a suicide blast last week at the airport in Kabul. More than 100 Afghans were also killed. The U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan was going to be risky and chaotic, the administration says, and points to the success of airlifting more than 100,000 people in the past weeks. Critics say Biden has made numerous dangerous missteps.
President Biden said that he wanted to take this Afghanistan off the plate for future presidents. He's done the exact opposite. For the next 20 years, American presidents will be dealing with this catastrophe.
Jake Sullivan, the U.S. National Security Advisor, said intelligence reports indicate terrorist groups in Afghanistan do not have advanced external plotting capability, but the concern is that they could develop them.
What we have proven over time in other countries, Ed, is that we are capable of suppressing the terrorism threat, including external plotting capabilities, without a large permanent presence on the ground.
Going forward, Secretary Blinken says the U.S. is going to pay close attention to Afghanistan, but will not have a diplomatic presence there.
We're going to have to see exactly what happens in the weeks and months ahead in terms of how the Taliban conducts itself, what the security situation is in the country.
Blinken says that the possibility of one day returning to the country which the U.S. occupied for nearly 20 years remains to be seen. Michelle Quinn, VOA News.
The humanitarian situation was already dire in Afghanistan before the Taliban swept into Kabul on August the 15th. But now it is getting worse as aid workers are coping with a new operating environment. VOA United Nations correspondent Margaret Bashir reports.
Conflict, drought, and COVID-19 have created one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world, leaving more than 18 million Afghans in need of assistance. The collapse of the government and the Taliban takeover have only deepened the emergency, displacing thousands more people. Aid agencies are used to working in difficult and dangerous conditions, but new uncertainties on the ground have forced many to assess the security situation and evacuate international staff, send local staff home, and pause some or all of their services.
I think for many of us and our peer agencies, it is important that we have a right, secure environment to operate. We want to have clarity on humanitarian access space, and we really want to make sure that the international community stand with Afghanistan and Afghan people and not forget them in the time of crisis.
The Taliban have signaled that they want the United Nations and some NGOs to continue their work, but have not said whether they will impose new restrictions or conditions on them.
So everything at the moment in terms of how UNICEF works is up in the air. We have not yet had a meeting at the central level with the new de facto authority. We are having dialogue at the regional and local level with local interlocutors. So we do not have a system in place yet.
The World Food Programme has been operating in the country since 1963 and currently feeds about 4 million people each month. With malnutrition rates on the rise, it is scaling up to reach 9 million monthly by November. Access has continued, but without a proper government in place, it is complicating WFP's work.
There's a political leadership in Doha. There is local leadership here. There is a leadership layer in various places. Our concern is that assurances that might be given at one level are honoured by local or even higher authorities in other levels.
Logistics are vital to the efficient and regular delivery of aid, and questions remain over who will run Kabul's airport after the U.S. leaves.
A functioning airport for a landlocked country is going to be so critical in order to get supplies in order for, our international staff to be able to get in, to get out, for medevac reasons.
The World Food Programme's Andrew Patterson says aid agencies fear donor funding could dry up in response to a Taliban-led government.
That means cutting off aid. We really need the humanitarian aid to keep flowing. That's how we're going to be able to stop mass famine in this country.
With millions of Afghans already food insecure, aid workers say funding cuts would be deadly. Margaret Bashir, VOA News.
As Haiti recovers from a quake that struck the country nearly 2 weeks ago, relatives bury a girl near the ruins of her house. She's among the more than 2,200 people killed by the 7.2 magnitude quake. Elsewhere, women say they fear for their safety and that of their children. More with VOA correspondent Mariama Diallo.
Relatives weep at the funeral of a girl named Razna who would have turned 11 this month. She perished when a 7.2 magnitude quake hit Haiti's southern peninsula nearly 2 weeks ago. Her father, Ronald Louisiana, said she died shortly after the quake.
The house collapsed with her inside it. She wasn't dead yet, but I couldn't find people to help me get her out from under the wall. By the time I managed to find people to help me, she had passed on. I lived through my daughter's death, all her agony.
Razna was buried near the ruins of a house in Marceline. Over 2,200 people were killed in the earthquake in a nation that is still recovering from another devastating quake about a decade ago. In another part of town, at a makeshift camp, women survivors talk about the difficult conditions they face and their fears for their safety and that of their children.
We have no access to toilets. We can't pee. Everyone is looking at you. We need adequate space to wash. At any moment, you can see a torch. You don't know if they are from here or somewhere else because it's an open field.
I have 3 children. We've been sitting here under sheets since Saturday. We can't go home because our house is destroyed. We have nowhere to live.
On Thursday, the United States pledged more money in aid to the victims. U.S. Agency for International Development Administrator Samantha Power speaking in Port-au-Prince with Haitian Prime Minister Ariel Henry.
I am pleased here to announce that USAID will provide an additional $32 million as part of a broader American response.
The Haitian government is facing a lot of challenges. We have political difficulties. We have economic difficulties.
But despite all these issues, he says his government is doing its best to address the current challenges. Mariama Diallo, VOA News.
As the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks approaches, VOA's Julia Tabo looks at some of the technology that works to keep U.S. airports safe.
Thomas Carter remembers the horror he felt watching planes crash into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center.
To watch those events unfold before my eyes, you knew that nothing would ever be the same.
Carter is now a federal security director at the Transportation Security Administration, the U.S. federal agency that oversees the nation's airports. He says the mission to make airports safer has in recent years increasingly turned to technology.
Technology is a key facet of our counterterrorism mission, and it's one of our key tools.
That technology, often invisible to the traveler moving through checkpoints, can include scanners that use algorithms to analyze a suspicious item inside a bag. Light waves checking liquids for explosives. And, coming to an airport near you, biometrics, such as facial recognition technology that can help confirm a person's identity. The AIT, or Advanced Imaging Technology machine, considered the workhorse of checkpoint security, scans the contours of the body using millimeter wave technology, radio waves passing through clothing, looking for anything unusual, such as explosives or bomb-making equipment.
If you were a suicide bomber, you would have to place that device somewhere on your person. This machine allows us to detect that.
Some of the latest airport security technology comes from the medical industry. The computed tomography machine works like a magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI machine, giving inspectors a 3D view that can be rotated 360 degrees.
Which allows our officers to get an extremely high-definition, high-resolution image.
Looking to the future, Carter says there may come a day when travelers scan themselves into the checkpoint with limited touching and mainstream use of biometrics.
That includes facial recognition, retina scanning, or fingerprints.
The 20th anniversary of 9/11, Carter says, will be a day of remembrance, reflection, and a renewal of purpose, especially as he looks to the Freedom Tower in Manhattan, built where the Twin Towers once stood.
We know that that represents the strength of our nation, and we know that we have a mission ahead of us to protect it.
Advanced technology and extra patience from passengers worldwide all can help in the mission to keep air travel safe. Julie Tabo, VOA News.
Well, and that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Linor Moudou, in Washington, every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.